Live yet again from the Fast Forward Studios. This is Road Gang Radio, and man, we get to hang out with Peter Stark. Lindsay, Jimmy, take it away.
Hey, by the way, Lindsay, just want to let people know we are working on all of our music and our intros and our bumpers and our buffers and all that stuff. We had a meeting about that yesterday. Very excited about that, and how we're going to start, bringing back all the old segments, the ones that people really loved. This is one that people have been asking about for a while. And Lindsay, once we have Road Gang Radio, we have Nemo Nation. The next thing we launch is July the 23rd. We over here at Radio Nemo are going to be launching We Should Write, where Lindsay gets a chance to actually talk about the healing power of writing, and we're going to be building that up over the next couple of weeks as we head into the 4th of July weekend, starting next week. Also wanted to point out to all of you folks out there that Peter and I, once Lindsay gets that all launched, are going to do our own thing, by the way, Lindsay, and there's a couple of spots.
What?
We're going to do our own thing, yeah.
What?
We're going to do our own thing,
Why
yeah.
am I not invited?
Well, I mean, you'll be invited from time to time, but it's like you got to work on We Should Write, man. What are you talking about?
FOMO. I mean, well, you know what, Peter, good morning. I'm excited that I get to talk to you for the second time on air. I know Jimmy steals you all the time, but I would like to take my power back here and take my Peter Stark power back. Take it back. But Peter would be, Jimmy, a great guest to have on We Should Write, talking about the healing power of writing, because Peter, you can take it to another level because you go and immerse yourself in these spaces and emotionally connect with the land and everywhere you are. And I got to imagine that writing and ideas flow through you when you're out in these empty spaces, I would have to assume. Good morning, by the way.
Totally. I find it really renewing to do that. Partly these days I'm writing about history and, these early explorers and getting into trouble in these really extreme desert, mountain, river landscapes. And it's so engrossing, healing in a way to imagine these people moving through the landscapes and in very difficult circumstances. And so it's a liberating experience from kind of everyday life.
I'm sure. Well, and you're on the Kevin Costner's feature on the History Channel, which is very cool, by the way. I did spot you in the trailer, and then I've got it saved to start watching the whole thing. But can we start there before I know you have a topic today, and Jim will get into that with Young Washington, being that it's the 250th anniversary around these parts. But quickly in your book, you take us to the blank spots, and specifically, I want to know so much about. I'm being called to New Mexico. I don't know why. I've never been, but I've been called there for like 8 years now. So I know I got to go and figure out.
It's one of the places.
You got to go to New Mexico. You definitely have to go to New Mexico. I just did an interview with a New Mexico native yesterday because I'm writing a book about Coronado and a search for the 7 cities of gold, which takes him through all those Puebloan areas of New Mexico, and it's such a wonderful, wonderful place. The land is. The first time I drove into New Mexico when I was 19 years old, driving down from Colorado, and I was a Midwestern boy, and I'd spent time in Colorado, but the first time I drove across the New Mexican border, it felt like the people had lived on this landscape for thousands of years. It just has a spiritual quality about it that's so cool and visible.
Oh, well, I have to go there. Well, then on that, to finish that up then, so I guess, as someone who's drawn to sonic landscapes, which I'm curious to you, how does that physical emptiness and how does it, I guess, coupled with the emotional presence, physical emptiness really brings emotional presence, where either in a good way or you have a nervous breakdown, either way, I guess. But how does it interact in those really, wild places? How does silence or space enhance the human experience? I guess I'm asking.
Because I think one of in those big empty places, the first thing you realize is how really tiny you are in the scope of the universe. And that can be a really healing, centering experience because, it just makes it clear that whatever issues you're wrestling with, all
of them, Peter.
All of them. Well, they're not even a tiny pinprick in the scope of the universe, and it's really helpful to be reminded of that. And yet there's also, you talk about the sonic landscape, and that's so much a part of those big empty places, because the sound can be so profound, either the total lack of sound, the absence of sound, listening to the silence. Somebody, a guy in Iceland, out in the middle of Iceland, said, "This is where we listen to the silence." And you hear these sounds that are so far beyond the human soundscape. They take place at a whole different scale. I mean, anytime you've been to the ocean, you hear it, the waves breaking on the beach. And you watch them come in from, across the globe. It takes you out of your own little world of enclosed walls and enclosed sound. So the soundscape in the blank spaces and the empty spaces is profound.
By the way, hi Peter. Lindsay has been so excited.
I'm sorry.
No.
I've hijacked Peter.
No. I was letting that happen. I know that you've listened. You've been a regular listener. I don't expect Lindsay to listen to every show pillar to post, but I know
it's all I do.
I know. But when it comes to the last empty places, I can promise you, my text begins to light up of ask him this, ask him this, ask him this, ask him this. The Last Empty Places with author and adventurer Peter Stark is a segment we are reintroducing to the show today. It's a guide to those out-of-the-way places in America that many listeners have driven through but may not have fully appreciated, understood, or contemplated. It's also a look at the last empty places in regards to history as well. The spaces that were empty before the journey that is the American continent eventually filled up. PeterStarkAuthor.com. You can find him on Instagram at Peter Stark Adventure Historian, Facebook at Peter W. Stark, and of course on Twitter with the X, Stark Adventurer. And we are thrilled to have him here this morning. My friend, I have missed you on the air with us. It's so good to have you back. A number of our callers have been demanding to know when you would make your triumphant return.
Give the people what they want.
Give them what they want. And it's so funny, too, because on YouTube, on our comment section, our good friend Foraught actually jumped right in and said point blank that people should absolutely hashtag Peter Stark. Young Washington is a fantastic book. Highly recommend it. Thank you, Foraught.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I could not agree more. So why don't we kind of dig into this topic today? Because Adam Rock, who is a Silver Star, was awarded the Silver Star. The last thing he said before he took his leave of us this morning on the show was he said, General Washington always said that a country is always kind of determined by how it treats its veterans. You wanted to kind of talk about Washington, since you know a little bit about him in regards to, and we can never have enough Washington talks. You wanted to kind of talk about Washington today a little bit, didn't you?
Well, I did in that today, June, well, we're now at the end of June, but this month, 250 years ago was when Washington really, as they say, stepped on to the national stage. Well, there was no nation then, but he stepped onto the world stage in June of 1775. It was when he was named commander-in-chief. And up till then, he'd been a young planter plantation owner in Virginia, and before that a military officer in the French and Indian War. And this is an area I know quite a lot about his early life. I wrote this, as you just mentioned, a book called Young Washington, about really it's the years between his late teens and late 20s. And that what's so curious about that period of his life is he's really kind of a mess in his 20s, and that he's really struggling. And he's not all that appealing of a personality at that point. He's vain, he's arrogant, he's like needy. He thinks he's always whining about being underappreciated and by his bosses. I mean, I
resonate with that.
Number of letters.
I identify.
Oh, I'm telling you, Lindsay, this story is so up your alley. I mean, Peter and I have touched on this, by the way. This really is, any rock star or anybody that wants to become a star needs to study what Washington did. But
why won't you like me?
Go ahead.
Yeah, right. It was like that. this was during the 1750s in the French and Indian War, which was a war back in the Ohio Valley when the British were trying to kick the French out of the Ohio Valley, and the French had Indian allies on their side, so that's why they call it the French and Indian War. It's hard to keep track of who's with who in that war. But Washington was on the British side, and he was a young colonial officer. So he was in the Virginia colonial military, and he had a group of troops that he ended up leading them into quite a lot of trouble and ambushing a French party back in the woods, which was actually what triggered the whole French and Indian War.
He started it.
He started it.
Would
I
me.
mean, literally, it's so crazy. There were a lot of tensions there to begin with, but he came sneaking over a ledge of rocks with his guys, like 40 guys, at dawn, way back in the woods, and because he'd heard there were some French guys there, and he just came sneaking over these rocks and opened fire on these French guys. Well, these French guys were down in this wooded glen. They were having breakfast. They were like waking up and having breakfast. And they were actually a diplomatic party trying to deliver a message to the British governor of Virginia. But instead, Washington just opened fire on these guys. And it just did not go over very well. Over in France, anywhere. It's really what got the whole thing rolling, the French and Indian War. So that was his kind of opening act in the French and Indian War. And he's a really young guy. It's just amazing. He was like 22 at the time. And then I won't go into all that history, but he ends up being like in 4 different battles in the French and Indian War, and every one of them is a disaster for one way or the other. Although he shows this tremendous bravery. He's so brave, he's just fearless. And he comes out of the French and Indian War, and the entire time he's been complaining that the British, who the British military should make him a British Royal Army officer. And he's just like a Virginia guy. He's a Virginia colonial officer, and they won't do it. And he complains and he complains and he complains about he's underappreciated, underpaid. They don't give him enough money for his table, for his dinner expenses. They won't bring him they won't make him an officer in the Royal Army, blah, blah, blah. So he finally, that all ends. And that 20 years later is when he ends up being named commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. And meanwhile, he's married Martha in Virginia, and that makes him, Martha's extremely rich in lands and slaves, and that makes him one of the wealthiest guys in Virginia. So that elevates his status. And when tensions start breaking out between Britain and America and the colonists, and things like the Stamp Act get passed, and the colonists are getting increasingly angry, that their county militias start to be organized in the colonies, and Washington helps organize the Fairfax County Militia. And Washington he's really vain. I mean, he's always been really vain in the way he looks and presents himself. And he always loves uniforms, and he's always buying silver lace. I don't know, what he does with the silver lace. I think he gives it to his, he gives it to his friends. But he designed a really cool uniform for the Fairfax County Militia, and it was a blue and a buff uniform, and it had silk sashes and all sorts of cool shoulder knots and stuff. And so when tensions broke out, and the Continental Congress met in June 1775, and the British Redcoats were occupying Boston. The Continental Congress said, we need to organize a body of troops to go after the British in Boston. And so they started raising troops, and then they said, well, who's going to lead these people, these troops that we're raising?
Yeah. 6'2" guy in a great suit, right?
Exactly, a 6'2" guy in great suit, and he was the only one. who like really had a serious war record because he'd been in the French and Indian War 20 years before. And even though his showing there, great bravery, but kind of disastrous in a lot of other ways, nobody brought up his record as an officer in the French and Indian War. They just knew he had experience, and they knew he had this really cool uniform. They knew he had really great military bearing, and he just kind of stood there by the door with his this tall, stately bearing, and people looked at him and said, "That's our dude."
That's our dude. That's our dude. Peter, tell me. Please tell me you've seen Nate Bargatze on Saturday Night Live skit playing George Washington.
I have not. I don't think.
Peter, I'm sending you this link. Please watch this today. It is one of the funniest things. So you have to watch it. Okay. Sidebar. Watch that. We'll come back to that. But back to, I love you talking about it because you talk about his love for the silver lace and the crisp uniforms. Who knew that Washington was like the original Chanel? But you realize or talk about how much that played a part in his promotion. So how important was image and presence back then and leadership, like both military and political? Like could charm and style outweigh competence? Because if so, we can mask that to today, of course.
Yeah, you really needed both, but for sure. I mean, to last.
Yeah.
And that, but in a way, it's so funny. Yeah, we talk about how there's such a presence of social media today, but presence was a huge thing in those days, 200 years ago, and that people were always presenting themselves. You presented yourself in court, you presented yourself here, and so every little detail of your dress and your bearing was judged, and it made a huge difference how your literal presence. That I'll read. This is just I just found this just a little quote from my book Young Washington at this moment when Washington is being named commander in chief, and this is one of the the delegates who was at this Continental Congress, Benjamin Rush. He was a doctor in Philadelphia. He writes this about Washington in that moment. He has so much martial dignity in his deportment that you would distinguish him to be a general and a soldier from among 10,000 people, Rush exclaimed. There is not a king in Europe that would not look like a valet de chambre by his side. And so here you go. Washington looks like a total stud dude compared to even a king in Europe. And that's what really read well in the Continental Congress on June 14th, 1775, 250 years ago.
The other big thing, and the book points this out, and we've talked about it too, and it's one of Churchill's great axioms of only speak when it improves the silence. Washington, in the time between the French and Indian War and his ascendancy to the head of the army, had learned to shut the hell up. He was really good at acting like he didn't want the very job that he wanted. He was terrific at being like, well, no, I can't take this. I mean, if you insist I take it, I'll take it. I'm not worthy of this honor. He had really learned to keep his powder dry, had he not?
He had, and there's another quote. He possessed the gift of silence, John Adams had said, decades later, and he had great self-command. And that he just as you're saying, he says, this is a tremendous honor you're giving me, but I want everybody to remember in this room that to this day I declare with the utmost sincerity I do not think myself equal to the command I am honored with. And so he's always like lowering the bar of expectations, but it's in this very gentlemanly way with a lot of presence, and that he mastered that, and he mastered so much over the course of his life, his career, especially given where he started, which, as I was saying, was quite a mess in those early days. But it was kind of like he made almost every mistake you could in public, in a military fashion, and he learned what he had to do, And so, and part of that was learning how to present himself, and the sort of sense of discretion and how to present himself. And very early, he learned how to be, how to really bond with his men, with his fellow officers and men. And he'd get down off his horse, and literally like help push a cannon up over a mountain to help his men. And they were with him so closely because he was so with them. And that was another huge factor in his leadership. So it was, presenting this sort of powerful presence, yet at the same time having this showing this humility, and to get down off your horse and shove a cannon up over a mountain.
Casually. So I don't know if Jim, we have, I don't know, about 9 minutes left with you, but I want to talk about, since it is, the first half of the show, we talk about how our listeners make a living, and the second half, which you're on today, is how we make a life out on the road. So those things we do that fill our bucket, so to speak. And, I'm curious to you, because I have a 6-year-old daughter. My husband travels the world for work, but we really want to do more travel together as a family and an exploration, and give our daughter something that maybe I didn't have as much of growing up, really like seeing the world. So you explore both solo and with your family. And I'm just curious to you, how to, traveling in those empty places that you've done so much and so much exploration. How does it, change your worldview, but also your relationship with your wife and kids, I guess, and the difference between solo, having that space, versus what you choose to bring your family to be a part of?
Yeah, well, the family thing's really interesting, and that we've really, gone after that with a passion, of family traveling. And my wife Amy grew up partly abroad. Her father was a foreign correspondent, so she spent 2 years in Thailand and 2 years in the Philippines and 2 years in Egypt. And so when we had kids, she said, well, I want our kids to grow up partly abroad. And so that's been a big part of our family life, is literally living in some of these places. We lived a year when our children were small in Mozambique, and then we lived a year in a small town in Brazil when they were in a kind of middle school, early high school. And it's sort of the introducing it to them when they're young is really important, and to get them out of their, the regular four walls of their house and comfort zone and their screen time or whatever it is. And so that the whole family kind of develops this ability to innovate in new places, and that just comes with practice, I think.
Yeah,
and doing it.
It's about the idea, Peter, with language. The idea we see when children learn language is the best shot is between like 2 and 8 is the best crack at it. It's also important to introduce people not just to the joys of traveling, but the difficulties of it as well too. To get kids used to the fact that when you travel on planes, when you walk on foot, when you go a lot of different places, you got to learn to shed what you don't need, and you've got to learn to be able to rough it on occasion. And the sooner they get used to that, the more effective co-travelers they become for you, and they develop a love for it as well.
Rough
correct?
it.
Yeah.
And trying to have fun along the way, trying to make it fun. And so it does take this sort of, ability to improvise and innovate, and also be ready for things, going wrong all the time, and going right a lot of the time too. And being open to the people you meet. I mean, it just makes me want to cry when I think of how many people we've met, total strangers in very distant places, who, for just no reason except the goodness of their heart, just embraced us and took us in. And it's like you've got to be open to that. And that's one of the things that scares me about kind of where we are now as a nation. And, it's not like we've been there before too, but this sort of paranoid idea about what lies out there in the world. What lies out there in the world is by far and large really, really good people. And to go out there and understand that and be embraced by them and embrace them is really important. And you can only really do that understand that by doing it.
So Peter, my husband Seamus is listening right now, who has traveled the world, but he's like, please tell me more about this guy. He's listening as he's making a drive over to Cape Cod to see some family actually right now. He's like, please tell me about every book this guy, everything he's ever written, because I want to know it all. He also asked, but I want to play a lightning round with you so we can get to know you better. But first, what would be the best time for my first time to go to spend time in New Mexico? I've been to Albuquerque, I've been to Santa Fe when I was young, but Taos is what's specifically calling me. What would in the outskirts? What would be the best time of year to go for the first time? Would you say? And I know it depends on what I want to do, but
yeah. Well, I actually might go to Taos in September myself this year. So
I'll meet you there, Peter.
Okay.
I'll be there.
I haven't checked on the weather, but the middle of summer is probably gonna be a little hot. But I was aiming for September, and I think the fall in the Rocky Mountains and Taos is is kind of like the last southernmost range of the Rockies, in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the Blood of Christ Mountains. The fall is so beautiful in the Rocky Mountains with the aspen leaves turning yellow. So
perfect.
That's kind of what I was targeting.
Okay, I will see you there. Okay, a quick lightning round before you lose you, if this is okay, Jim. If this is okay, Peter.
Oh wait. Okay, before you do the lightning round,
yeah.
One thing that if I should recommend my book, my wife's book, Amy Ragsdale, Ragsdale, wrote a book called Crossing the River, and it's about the year we spent with our kids in Brazil, in a small town in Brazil. We were the only gringos in town. Nobody spoke English. They were, they just landed in a little school in a little town in Brazil that was Portuguese only, and she wrote a memoir about that really gives a sense of how it feels crossing the river.
I will absolutely read that. Great recommendation. You can both that and, of course, Peter's book as well. Our listeners love you and love to consume everything you have. So, okay, first item you pack.
Round.
Yeah, first item you pack when heading into the wilderness.
The first item I pack, I would say, a knife and a cigarette lighter.
Okay. Favorite historical figure you want to go camping with?
Teddy Roosevelt.
Nice.
Okay.
Nice.
It's lightning. We don't even need the why. Best soundtrack. This one's important. Best soundtrack or artist or whatever for driving through the American West.
Oh, I just heard you play Keep on Truckin'. You can't go wrong with that one.
Very good. Most underrated U.S. state to get lost in?
Underrated U.S. state to get lost in. Let me think about that. I've got one for you. Southern Indiana.
Okay. Did not see that coming. And finally, book you'd take to a remote cabin for a month.
Oh, man. It's like all the ones I haven't read.
So what's next on the list?
Next on the list of what I haven't, it's like for a month, I think I could take on War and Peace in a month.
Ooh.
There you go. Peter, guess what? We're out of time, and we actually have more show to go. So we love you. I will talk with you soon over the next couple of days and weeks as we figure out what your and I's next adventure is. But I'm so glad to have you back. Guys, go to...
And Lindsay, we'll connect. We'll connect, too.
Thank you. I'm going to send you the Nate Bargatze the video when we get off. PeterStarkAuthor.com. Find out more. Consume everything this man does. He's a national treasure, Jimmy.
Goodbye, Peter. Goodbye, Lindsay. Oh, you're coming back. So is Tara. Thank you, brother.
Check out the new over-the-top lineup at participating Country Pride and Iron Skillet restaurants. 3 gigantic sandwiches loaded with flavor. Try the chicken parm stack, the big country combo, or the ultimate smash melt. The ultimate smash melt. 2 delicious smash burger patties, surrounded by 2 grilled cheese sandwiches. 2 sandwiches in 1. Visit your favorite Country Pride or Iron Skillet restaurant and come hungry.
Available for dine-in only at participating Country Pride and Iron Skillet restaurants inside TA or Petro Travel Centers.
Did you know it's extremely easy to join the Wreaths Across America mission to remember our fallen heroes, while at the same time honoring those who are currently serving our country and their families? Plus, you're helping to teach our younger generation about the value of freedom. With just one $17 donation to Wreaths Across America, you're sponsoring a fresh Maine Balsam Remembrance Wreath. They've really become a symbol of America's respect for those who bravely served and are no longer with us. To sponsor your wreath, just visit wreathsacrossamerica.org. That's wreathsacrossamerica.org.
From Nashville to the Big Easy, this is Road Gang Radio, broadcasting live from Fast Sports Studios with your hosts, Lindsay, Lawler, Jimmy Mack, and I think we got Tea Time in the house?
Tea time.
Tea time.
Tea time.
Jimmy, I love Peter Stark. Thank you so much for introducing me to him. And, you know, it's I have to say, Jim, and I know you'll understand this, like when I first started doing the show with you years ago, I would get really intimidated if somebody like that would have come on, because I would feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not versed enough in history. How could I have a conversation? And then I've learned to relax. And again, we take out the word interview and have conversation. And so talking to him is equal parts like connection and learning, which I think is really, really cool. That's why I love doing the show with you, because you were so versed in history and everything. You were so versed in everything. And so to be able to have that piece and get to learn from you. But like, I was sitting last night thinking about, I'm like, what really brings me joy in this world? Like, what is it? And the thing more than anything in the entire world that brings me joy is deep conversation and that human connection. I love it more than anything in the world. It's what lights me up, because that brings in both family and friends and everything. I love it more than anything in the world, which is why I love this show and love meeting people like that. So anyway, I think it's cool to like bridge the gap and realize you can have a conversation with anybody if you're willing to learn and listen.
Oh my God, and the going and the doing. And I will tell you this right now, anybody who is naturally curious should love this show. That's the only skill you need. Everything else can be acquired and accumulated. Before we actually get to the turtle herself, if an arrogant screw-up can become president, a former addict can become a successful trucker. Great motivational story, and a big thumbs up to Teddy Roosevelt. That's from 4aught in response to our good friend Peter Stark, peterstarkauthor.com. I can't wait for you to meet him, Lindsay. As I was telling you off the air, he is as nice in person as he seems on the air, maybe even more so. And that
I feel like I have met him. He's one of those people you talk to. I'm like, oh crap, we haven't met actually. I feel like we have spent Christmas together, but we have not.
He is a brave dude, too. He is a brave, brave man. You read those books, dude, and there's some stuff he does where you're like, oh, holy moly, guacamole.
So tell me real quick, and then Tara, we're coming at you. Tell me quick, because actually my husband is listening, Seamus, and he needs an audiobook for his long drive. What are he's got multiple books. Where would you suggest you start with him?
Young Washington or The Last Empty Places. I don't want to give your husband sleepless nights, and Last Breath, while incredible, is really terrifying because it's 15 ways you can die in the wilderness.
Oh, I think Seamus would actually love that.
Well, actually, it might be. Actually, if he wants to read Last Breath, it's a pretty darn good read. But The Last Empty Places and Young Washington are a great place to start. You can't go wrong with either place. And a lot of great articles for Outside Magazine, just some really terrific stuff. And it's accessible, Lindsay. It's really fun writing. It's written beautifully, and his ability to track motion, movement, and geography. Peter, there's a reason why Matthew Holbert, Megan Kate Nelson, and Peter Stark are the authors that we have chosen to forge relationships with. They write about the stuff that our listeners like, and they write about it well. So that's where I'd begin. I would begin with Young Washington, which is how we became friends. That story is crazy. Tara, have I told you that story about how Peter and I became friends? Have we gotten into that?
Can you tell me?
Yeah, really quickly.
You know that he's about to, Tara.
Well, funny you should ask. But Claire, thank you. Claire,
go on.
Claire books him, and he was supposed to be a 15-minute drop-in for Young Washington, Literally 45 minutes later, I said, screw it, and we went the whole hour and ended up talking. And then I went and looked up his other works, and I saw The Last Empty Places. So let me just get a couple of these books. So I went on to Amazon, ordered a couple of used copies of Last Breath and I read them in a weekend. And I told Claire, I said, let's just see if this guy would do a regular segment with me. And Claire's like, what would we call it? And I said, The Last Empty Places. I said, because I would really think that our listeners would love an adventure. And Peter is like the best adventurer there.
And they are all on Audible, by the way. Yes, Seamus, I will text you the links here in a minute when I get off the air. But yes, anybody listening, all of his books, those 4 titles, including Astoria, are all on Audible.
Astoria is great too, by the way. Astoria is the one you got to warm up for because it's epic. Astoria is epic. It's about the journey across the country to actually see if they could create in the Pacific Northwest what the colonists had created with the original 13 colonies. Jefferson sends these guys off and says, go found some more colonies on the West Coast.